Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: Taiwan is raising its military budget to over 3% of GDP, with officials already eyeing an even bigger jump in the years ahead. The move follows Trump's call for stronger alliances and deterrence. Members of the free world responding to President Trump's deterrence call across the Indo-Pacific. Key allies and partners are boosting their defense budgets. We break it down. How close are we to a war over Taiwan? We spoke with an expert who explains why the West may need to prepare.
I think it's time that allies really kind of make it explicit what they're aiming for. If we have to go to war, if China does provoke a war.
And the Philippines and Australia joining forces in a new defense pact. The deal boosts military cooperation between the two key U.S. allies and counters growing threats from communist China. As aggressions from the Chinese Communist Party grow, U.S. allies and strategic partners in the Asia-Pacific are answering the call of President Trump's peace through strength. Here's a look at the latest defense updates from these key partners. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te is calling for defense spending to reach 5% of the island's GDP over the next 5 years. He made the remarks after the government set next year's defense budget at just over 3% of GDP. But with Lai's term ending in 2028, it's unclear whether Taiwan will actually reach the 5% target. Heading north to Japan, a recent think tank report says Tokyo's military spending jumped 21% last year. The report also found Japan scrambled fighter jets against Chinese aircraft 465 times between last April and this March. That's on top of other airspace and maritime intrusions by China. Turning to Southeast Asia, the Philippines is also boosting defense cooperation with the U.S. Earlier this year, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth pledged $500 million in aid to help the ally modernize its military. He also promised advanced defense training, new equipment, and a cyber program. Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines all sit along the First Island Chain, a string of islands that blocks China's Navy from entering the deep Pacific. It's widely seen as a key barrier preventing Chinese forces from threatening the U.S. mainland. Moving west to the Korean Peninsula, South Korea's foreign minister on Monday signaled openness to Washington's call for higher defense spending ahead of the president's visit to the White House next week. And down in the Pacific, another U.S. ally, New Zealand, announced plans to buy 5 maritime helicopters and 2 Airbus jets from the U.S. The Trump administration's foreign policy is realigning U.S. alliances across Europe and the Indo-Pacific to counter growing threats from China. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more.
Just look at what took place during the last 4 administrations. Under George W. Bush, Russia invaded Georgia. Under Barack Obama, Russia took Crimea. Under Joe Biden, Russia invaded Ukraine. But under President Trump, Russia did not invade nor take anything. That's because Russia has always greatly respected President Trump and his peace through strength foreign policy approach.
The Trump administration argues that its peace through strength foreign policy is yielding results as it has in the past, and it is critical to face the greatest security threats of the present and future.
But thanks to President Trump, Asian allies should look to countries in Europe as a newfound example. NATO members are pledging to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, even Germany. So it doesn't make sense for countries in Europe to do that while key allies in Asia spend less on defense in the face of an even more formidable threat.
The Trump administration's efforts to bring the Ukraine war to an end respond to a growing assumption among U.S. allies on Beijing's plans to launch an attack on the Indo-Pacific theater.
Xi Jinping, the president of China and general secretary of the Communist Party, before he would attack Taiwan, will first make a call into Moscow, his very junior partner in all of this, one Vladimir Putin, to ask him to keep us busy in this part of Europe. And this shows you that the transatlantic and the Indo-Pacific are getting more and more intertwined.
The Trump administration has also called on Japan, Australia, and South Korea to increase their military spending to deter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. It's also important to note that China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and India all spend more than any other U.S., NATO, or Indo-Pacific ally on military and defense. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Could China be moving toward an invasion of Taiwan? As tensions rise in the Taiwan Strait, one expert explains why the West needs to prepare for exactly that possibility. To dive deeper, we spoke with Paskal, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. President Trump said recently that China's Xi Jinping promised him that China would not invade Taiwan while Trump was president. Now, given Communist Chinese leaders' history of not saying publicly what they actually mean, how should we read this? Because so far the Chinese side hasn't refuted this. Is this, an actual guarantee, or is this like something that led up to World War II?
Well, they also said they wouldn't use the Scarborough Shoal or any of the South China Sea. Take it for what you will. And I think that President Trump also is taking it, with not just a grain, but maybe an entire ocean full of salt.
We do see on Taiwan's side, however, that they are saying Taiwan has to rely on itself for its own defense. It's trying to buy about 50,000 more in terms of drones and arms from the U.S., actually. But I know in terms of history, right, recent history, in terms of the Ukraine war, it was when Ukraine said they wanted to defend themselves that other countries started coming in. So perhaps it's laying that groundwork. But lots to see. With all the areas covered today, though, any final thoughts you'd like to share?
This is a time for understanding who has the same values you have, and who wants to see a world that is similar to your ultimate goal. So we had before the U.S. entered World War II, the U.S. president and the Prime Minister of the UK got together and wrote the Atlantic Charter, which was the vision for and included getting rid of Nazi tyranny, for example. And I think it's time that allies really kind of make it explicit what they're aiming for. If we have to go to war, if China does provoke a war, what are we fighting for, and where are we trying to head? And I think that will make it much more clear among allies who actually your allies are, who's willing to fight for the same things you're fighting for, so that these disagreements over things that may seem transitory, but if you don't handle them properly, can actually create fractures with your core allies and friends, gets mediated as quickly as possible.
Paskal, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang is in Taiwan on Friday for a visit to the world's largest chip manufacturer, TSMC. This is the company that makes chips for Nvidia, as well as other companies such as Apple and AMD. Huang says Nvidia is waiting on Chinese demand before making more H20 chips. Here's more about his trip.
Nvidia boss Jensen Huang arrived in Taiwan on Friday.
My main purpose is to visit TSMC.
That makes it a meeting of the world's most valuable firm and the world's biggest contract chip maker. TSMC said Huang would give a speech to staff without offering many further details. The visit comes after Donald Trump indicated earlier this month that Nvidia might be allowed to sell more advanced AI chips to China. Reuters sources said this week that the company is working on a new semiconductor dubbed the B30A. That could replace or complement the H20, the most advanced chip it's currently allowed to sell in China. Asked about the B30A, Huang would only say that it was up to the US government what products it would be allowed to sell to Beijing.
Offering a new product to China for the data center, AI data centers, the follow-on to H20, that's not our decision to make. It's up to, of course, the United States government. And we're in dialogue with them, but it's too soon to know.
For now, he said he was trying to assess demand for the current chip.
We've prepared a lot of H20 already, but now we are waiting for purchase orders from China customers. And so when we receive the orders, we will be able to produce more.
Nvidia only got permission to resume sales of the H20 to China in July. Washington had imposed export curbs in 2023, concerned over the supply of cutting-edge AI tech to the country. Shortly after the July green light, Nvidia ordered 300,000 H20s from TSMC to add to its existing inventory. However, days later, China's cyberspace regulator and state media warned against the company's chips, saying they could pose security risks.
A U.S. Navy sailor has been convicted of espionage for selling military secrets to a Chinese intelligence officer. Let's take a closer look. Prosecutors say Jing Chaowei leaked photographs, ship movements, and weapons details from the USS Essex. A jury found him guilty on 6 counts, including conspiracy to commit espionage and unlawful export of defense data. Officials say in 2022, a Chinese officer posing as a naval enthusiast contacted Wei. Over 18 months, he sent the officer restricted data and was paid more than $12,000. Wei is scheduled to be sentenced in December. Over to the Indo-Pacific, 2 key U.S. allies, the Philippines and Australia, announced Friday that they are working toward a new defense agreement. The Pact aims to step up military cooperation to address regional security challenges posed by Communist China. Here's a closer look.
We are both countries which are deeply invested in the rules-based order.
The activities of China in any area, whether in the Sierra Madre or any area under their nebulous claims, are a matter not only of concern but of condemnation, because these are in gross violations of international law.
And we both acknowledge and are experiencing the pressure that the rules-based order is being placed under here in the Indo-Pacific.
China professes to want dialogue and negotiation. There is a deficit of trust that they need to overcome. And with these activities that have been happening, that deficit has widened more than lessened.
The Philippines says the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Pact will pave the way for more frequent joint military drills aimed at beefing up joint operational capability and strengthening regional deterrence. Australia says the agreement will also support the development of defense infrastructure in the Philippines, with projects planned at 5 locations. Security engagements between the 2 allies have deepened as they look to counter China's increasingly aggressive activities in the South China Sea.
The Philippines is one of the U.S.'s key allies in Asia for containing the Chinese Communist Party. It sits along what's called the First Island Chain. This string of islands forms the U.S.'s first strategic line of defense, keeping China's access to the Pacific in check. If Chinese submarines were able to move freely into the Pacific Ocean, they could launch missiles, including nuclear-armed ones, at the U.S. mainland. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is signaling he may be open to cutting interest rates after pressure from President Trump. Here's part of Powell's keynote speech Friday at the Fed's annual event in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Our policy rate is now 100 basis points closer to neutral than it was a year ago. And the stability of the unemployment rate and other labor market measures allows us to proceed carefully as we consider changes to our policy stance. Nonetheless, with policy in restrictive territory, the baseline outlook and the shifting balance of risks may warrant adjusting our policy stance.
Powell acknowledges growing risks to the job market while also saying risks of higher inflation remain. Powell's comments open the door to a rate cut at the Fed's meeting from September 16th to 17th, but they will still have to consider jobs and inflation reports in the coming weeks. The Fed has kept its benchmark interest rate steady at 4.25% to 4.5% since December. The stock markets surged in response to Powell's comments today. The address is Powell's final one as chair, with his term ending in May. The administration is searching for a replacement.
President Trump has been calling for a rate cut for months, but Fed Chair Jerome Powell is stressing the uncertainties in the economy, including factors like immigration policy, tax changes, and reciprocal tariffs, all of which could affect inflation and the central bank's next move.
The effects of tariffs on consumer prices are now clearly visible. We expect those effects to accumulate over coming months, with high uncertainty about both timing and amounts. It's also possible, however, that the upward pressure on prices from tariffs could spur a more lasting inflation dynamic, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed.
To battle both high inflation and high unemployment are the Fed's key missions.
In the near term, risks to inflation are tilted to the upside and risks to employment to the downside, a challenging situation. It is a curious kind of balance that results from a marked slowing in both the supply of and demand for workers. This unusual situation suggests that downside risks to employment are rising. And if those risks materialize, they can do so quickly in the form of sharply higher layoffs and rising unemployment.
The Fed's annual conference is underway in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Boston Fed President Susan Collins says the central bank is not yet ready to cut rates, warning that inflation is likely to remain elevated into early next year. Coming up, President Trump speaking out on TikTok, addressing security risks and the future of the Chinese-owned app. Is a sale to American buyers possible?
We're going to watch the security concerns, and we have buyers, American buyers. We have American buyers.
Microsoft striking back at Beijing's hackers. It's now limiting some Chinese firms' access to its cybersecurity early warning system after recent attacks. Another step for the U.S. in the space race with China and Russia. A SpaceX rocket carried a military space plane into orbit Thursday, launching from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And India has successfully test-fired its Agni 5 missile, capable of striking all of China. The launch comes as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi wraps up his visit to India. We'll take a closer look after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Staying on TikTok or not, President Trump is weighing in on the tech giant's future in the U.S. He's addressing security concerns related to the Chinese-owned app and exploring the possibility of American buyers.
We're going to watch the security concerns, and we have buyers, American buyers. We have American buyers. And I haven't spoken to President Xi about it. At the right time when we're set, I'll do it. In the meantime, until the complexity of things work out, we just extend a little bit longer.
The security concerns focus on fears that American user data could be sent back to TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, based in China. Trump's comments come shortly after the White House launched its own TikTok account to reach younger audiences. In Europe, hundreds of TikTok employees in London are at risk of losing their jobs in content moderation and security. The potential cuts come as the UK's Online Safety Act phases in, with the latest child safety rules taking effect in July. The act requires tech companies to stop the spread of harmful content or face fines of roughly $21 million, or 10% of global revenue. On Friday, TikTok told its London Trust and Safety team, the group responsible for keeping the platform safe by removing harmful content, that moderation and quality checks will no longer be handled from London. The company plans to shift that work to artificial intelligence and move operations elsewhere. London's Communication Workers Union says about 300 people work in that department, and most are expected to be affected. Like YouTube and Meta, TikTok says it will lean more on AI to estimate a user's age based on their activity. AI will also be tasked with taking down harmful content, including disinformation, violent material, and sexual imagery. The layoffs are part of a broader restructuring of TikTok's European operations. Early this month, TikTok announced it will shut down its trust and safety team in Germany. The announced cuts come even as TikTok's revenues continue to grow across Europe. Danish jewelry house Pandora will close up to 100 concept stores in China. That's according to the company's second quarter revenue report from last Friday. Here's more.
The scale of the upcoming closure is double what Pandora announced before, 50 stores. The jewelry maker said the decision is aimed at optimizing its China retail network. The move will also cut Pandora's China market presence by half. According to Pandora's website, the company currently operates around 200 stores in China. China's always been a key market for Pandora, but sales have dropped and now account for about 3% of its overall revenue. The country is considered one of the largest jewelry markets in the world. But the problem is, there are now fewer Chinese people who are willing to spend money on luxury goods. According to official data, China's consumer confidence is nearing historic lows this year. Pandora's chief executive said earlier that the company is struggling to regain its traffic in China to pre-pandemic levels.
Microsoft says it has scaled back some Chinese companies' access to its early warning system for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. The move comes after last month's widespread hacking attempts targeting Microsoft SharePoint servers. Let's zoom in. Microsoft and others have blamed Beijing for at least some of the hacking attempts. That raised suspicions among several cybersecurity experts that there was a leak in the Microsoft Active Protections program. Microsoft uses the program to help security vendors worldwide learn about cyber threats before the general public so they can better defend against hackers. Beijing has denied involvement in any SharePoint hacking. The U.S. taking another step in the space race with China and Russia. A SpaceX rocket just carried a military space plane into orbit. The launch took place Thursday from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. On board was a military space plane known as the X-37B orbital test vehicle. This marks the 8th mission for the X-37B program, which began in 2010. The X-37B is operated by the United States Space Force and built by Boeing. Most of its missions remain secret, so details are rarely shared. Over the years, the X-37B has spent more than 4,200 days in space. The Spaceplane has also studied how space radiation affects seeds, helping plan future missions to the moon and beyond. India has successfully test-fired its Agni 5 missile from a range in the eastern state. According to India's defense ministry, the missile met all operational requirements and performed exactly as planned. The announcement came the same day Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi concluded his visit to New Delhi. The Agni 5 is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead and could strike Beijing once operational. India's missile program is aimed at strengthening defenses against China amid tensions dating back to a deadly 2020 border clash. India and China recently held talks to ease tensions along the disputed Himalayan border, with Wang Yi's visit coming ahead of Prime Minister Modi's trip to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit later this month. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round the clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.